explore the idea of vocation through each other's stories. Vocation is not just about the jobs we have. For many of us, our vocation and our jobs are in alignment, and for many of us, they're not. As a pastor, I am first and foremost not a preacher or an organizational systems builder or a fundraiser or a teacher or a communicator or a caregiver. My vocation is to be a student of the divine, also known as a disciple. If I'm not first God's student, I cannot be any of the rest of those long litany of things with sustainability or integrity. Over the last year and a half or so, since this global pandemic began, it has been harder to be a student of the divine than before. It's harder because sometimes it feels like God is hiding from us in viruses, in fires, floods, tyrants, and all the plagues of today. It's harder because my house has often been overflowing with people who normally have other places to go. And it's harder because others of us are struggling with loneliness we've never experienced before. It's harder because we are all so tired of our lives feeling so limited by this disease and its persistent changes, all the while watching as some people deny the existence of the very threat itself. So this is why this morning we pause to tell stories about vocation, about what it means to follow God's call on our lives to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly. This is why we pause to ponder where indeed our gladness comes from and how it might meet the world's deepest needs. We need each other's stories of vocation to remember our own. So listen now as we hear from three beloved Lindalians. First, Allison Connelly-Vetter, then Paul Thuras, and then Susan Vries. Let us begin now, and I will pause myself. And Allison, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Wonderful. So good to be here with you all. My reflection is really about my last 3 years of seminary, which I just finished in May, my sense of vocation changing and shifting, and now where I find myself now. So over the past 3 years of seminary, and now as I begin work in ministry, I felt my sense of vocation grow and change. When I first arrived at seminary, I was interested in campus ministry and possibly pursuing a PhD in disability theology. I was also feeling out my identity as a queer Catholic and UCC hybrid, and I feel that my denominational grounding has much to do with my sense of vocation, just as much as any job might. After my first year of graduate school, I had the opportunity to come do an internship here with Lyndale, and during that time, I had the opportunity to preach and help lead worship, but perhaps most meaningfully to lead a reflection group for disabled, mentally ill, or differently abled members of the Lyndale community. That experience solidified my vocation to work in ministry with my fellow disabled people who experienced the world in the ways both different and similar to me. During my second year of graduate school, I was able to intern with the campus ministry in New York, and I loved it. I got to lead discussion sessions, music ministry, retreats, and provide mentorship for college students. After that year, I wrote in my internship self-evaluation on the topic of vocation. I feel increasingly called to work with young adults such as college students, although leading discussions on spirituality for this campus ministry has also made me consider a vocation in adult education, or providing adult education as part of my ministry. I also feel increasingly called towards ordination in the UCC and called away from getting a PhD, at least for now. During my last year of seminary last year, during a pandemic, I interned with Benincasa Community, a lay-led Catholic community in New York. I helped coordinate their bi-monthly liturgies and ran homily workshops and presider orientations for our lay members. This community too included a lot of young adults, many just out of college or joining after completing a year of service. Interning with Benincasa helped me get a feel for the nuts and bolts of running a religious community and also instilled in me a deep vocation to lay leadership and lay faith formation. At the same time I was interning with Benincasa, I was doing paid communications work for 3 churches in Minneapolis. Even though my long-term goal is not work in church communications, part of my sense of call was preparing to move back from Minneapolis to NYC, moving back to Minneapolis from New York. And taking these jobs allowed me to live into that call and that vocation with some sense of financial stability. At the end of my seminary experience, I wrote the following about my experience of vocation. I'm currently working in church communications in addition to my internship with Benincasa. I am enjoying this church communications work, and I'm learning a lot about how to be a minister, and maybe just as much about how I do not want to be a minister. I know that I don't feel called to this work in the long run, but I'm feeling called to this work right now as I'm in a period of transition, graduating, moving, buying a house, getting married, and continuing to discern my call to ministry. I've had conversations recently with church leaders who have affirmed my call to ordained ministry, which has been a helpful balance for me as I question the need for ordained clergy as opposed to increased lay leadership. Working with Benincasa provided me an understanding of the possibilities for lay leadership and the work and ministry required to make that happen in a meaningful and supported way. Now, 4 months after graduating seminary, I'm continuing some church communications work while taking on a role as Children and Families Program Coordinator for Spirit of St. Stephen's Catholic Community, a fully lay-led radical community of peace activists, current and former nuns and priests, and justice-seeking people of faith working to make the church and the world a better place for those on the margins. I never saw myself working with children and youth. I haven't had any sort of formal role with anyone under the age of 19 since I graduated from my undergrad. And yet vocation is a tricky thing because I feel called to this community as I feel it aligns with my value of lay leadership, ongoing faith and justice formation, and a queering of what it means to be Catholic in UCC. For me as a UCCer, I also find this community to be deeply congregationalist and to have primary values of covenant with each other, with ancient and modern sacred texts, and with the traditions and history of the Catholic Church. For now, I feel rooted and grounded in this surprising and unexpected role, even as I continue to grow in my understanding of my sense of vocation. My last note on vocation is that I recently got married about a month ago, and my wife and I are discerning the ways that we can be active, engaged, and justice-making members of our broader community. For me, I believe that the call to family and love and community is just as important as my call to any particular kind of work or ministry. And I look forward to continue following the call of the Spirit in all aspects of my life. Amen.
Thanks, Allison. So years ago, I gave a talk on Labor Day about being an accidental statistician. This one is called The Accidental Statistician Can See Retirement from Here. Career at a liminal point. So, like many, this past year presented an opportunity for me to re-examine my work and think about what comes next. Unlike many, I was never laid off. My hours weren't cut back. I wasn't forced to work in unsafe conditions. I am privileged and lucky to be able to do what I do. I'm a statistician and research methodologist working at the VA. I'm also an adjunct professor teaching students getting their master's in counseling at St. Mary's University. And I'm also a research associate supporting research in psychiatry and pharmacy at the U of M. And I kept doing all of these things the whole time during the pandemic, albeit in an endlessly Zoomy kind of way. For years, I avoided thinking about retirement because it just seemed too far away. Sure, I had a retirement account and I knew that eventually I would retire, but I was nowhere near old enough to really think about it. But years go by and colleagues start to retire and suddenly it's not so far away. And then the pandemic hit and everything was thrown into some cosmic blender and nothing was the same, including work. And because of that, I really looked where I hadn't before. And I caught a glimpse of life beyond work, of life in retirement. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. So now I'm in a kind of liminal state in the work world, but peering over the fence at the not work world, or at least the different work world. And it's exciting, it's exhausting. It's like working on that last paper in college before graduation. Now it's a combination of too long to wait for the date several years in the future and a panicky realization that there's not enough time to get everything done before it happens. It's a time to contemplate what to keep and what to let go. I've had to change physical offices 3 times in the past 2 years after 20 years in the same office. It was an amazing exercise in finding out how much stuff you can get rid of and nothing bad happens. It's a liberating feeling. For many of us, we are in a liminal space right now. We might be looking at retirement, a career change, a change in lifestyle, a reshuffling of our priorities, rethinking our vocation. That's okay. It's an opportunity. Welcome to the liminal zone, everyone. I'll catch you on the other side. Amen.
Good morning, I'm Susan. Nice to see everybody this morning. I'm going to talk about my sense of calling to care for people. Now, I grew up in a very biblically based household, so I heard a lot of Bible stories. You've probably all heard the story about Samuel when he was a little boy and he's sleeping in the temple on the floor and he hears a voice calling, Samuel, Samuel. He goes to the high priest who says, that isn't me, so go back to bed. The third time, the high priest realizes, oh, wait a minute, this isn't me, this is spirit. So Samuel listens again in his sleep, and he responds, when he hears the voice of God calling his name, he responds, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Well, I heard that story a lot as a little kid, and it really meant something. And then there's chapter 21 of the Gospel of John, where Peter keeps saying, Jesus, don't leave us. What should we do? And Jesus keeps saying, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, tend my sheep. And I think that was the basis of my sense of calling to care for other people, even though I had disagreements with my biblically based dad. But okay. So my work life was mostly working with children, therapy with kids, doing therapy with sexually abused kids, working with families going through divorce, doing mediations with families, trying to help them reconcile with each other their anger, if not their marriage. That was not my problem, but to reconcile some of the angry interactions. So then came retirement. Okay, so the first 6 months I spent lying on a couch reading murder mysteries. This was probably not my calling, but it was fun. And then the calling reasserted itself, and I heard, like Samuel, I heard the voice of spirit saying, tend my sheep. Hello, wake up. So I turned to some literal feeding of sheep. I worked with loaves and fishes to serve a meal at Holy Rosary Church, which is right by the Little Earth Reservation Native American spot. I worked at a place in St. Paul called the Family Place, where we had homeless families with children, taking care of kids, talking to moms about discipline, and making meals, feeding again. I'm real big on literal feeding. I love feeding people. And then there was spiritual feeding. And the big part of that for me was my own spiritual practice, feeding myself with reading, with a morning practice of meditation every day for a while. Time to time that sloughs off. But then I hear myself speaking to myself saying, you have to tend your own practice, Susan. And right now, tending other people, I'm looking out the window. I live in Beckettwood, which is a senior co-op, and I have wonderful work to do tending all the sheep in this co-op. Okay, you can laugh, Lynn and John. By working on diversity issues, by working to bring equity and inclusion into this beautiful colonnade of white people It's a joy. And I'm looking forward to working to tend sheep at Lindale. Looking forward to entering the befriender group and seeing what I can contribute. So, and all of this feels very led to me by Divine Spirit. So be well, friends. Thank you.